Welcome back to another episode of Harmonious at Lunch, the show that fuels your business success. I'm Brandon Gano, your host and guide through the world of harmonious business growth. Today, we're unlocking powerful strategies with industry experts to help your business thrive. If you're a business owner, entrepreneur, or executive, you are in the right place. Join me and our incredible guest today on the journey to clarity, growth, and success. It is time to revolutionize your approach to business. Let's dive in with another episode of Harmonious at Lunch. Welcome back to some more bite-sized business advice. We got a good one today. We're going to talk about all the conflicts you have in your life and in your business and how to not screw them up. At least that's the goal. So we're going to see how we can unpack that in 15 minutes. But I have a guest expert with me, a conflict to growth expert, which is super interesting. I'm excited to see what that means. I've never met one of those before. Her name is Kat Newport. Kat, before we go any further, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited, Brandon.
So, conflict to growth expert. That's interesting. But talk to me about conflict. It's one of those things when you own a business or you are a human being. So yes, this applies to everybody. You have conflict with other people. That's just human nature. It's not bad. It's not good. We're not going to label it just yet, but there are good and bad ways to handle it. So let's unpack for the audience, for the listener. What is conflict? Let's start there in your words.
So when I'm talking about conflict, I'm talking about it as two perspectives coming together, two different perspectives coming together, and what happens when they rub. So we see this in business. I want to do it one way. You want to do it another way. They come together. What are you going to do about it? And that's where it can become healthy conflict or unhealthy conflict, to your point.
Yeah, well, that's probably a better way to put it too, healthy and unhealthy, because rather than say good or bad, because we need conflict, right? We need to have differing opinions in order to grow our companies or just as a human being get better in life. That's the definition of improvement, is doing something differently, which presents conflict. So I want to understand how we do this in an unhealthy way in business, because that to me is really where things start to fall apart. And then we can figure out how to put the pieces back together and do it in a more healthy way. But what do you typically see are unhealthy versions of conflict in the workplace?
So unhealthy versions can get attached to a couple of things. So the first one that comes to mind is the hot reactor. So somebody who looks at conflict sees it as, and I hate to use this word, almost as an ego sort of hit, going, oh my gosh, somebody's coming at me with a different idea. They don't agree with me, and boom, off they go. I've seen this in organizations as yelling. I've seen this as shunning. I've seen this as gossiping. I've seen this becoming huge HR nightmares. Just absolute nightmares. And this can happen at any strata. I've seen it happen, relatively, low-level colleagues versus, leadership C-suites where the battle rages and we have these clash of the titans kind of things. So I see that a lot. I also see leaders who are insecure when they deal with conflict, just shutting down all conversations around the conflict, trying to keep the peace, which then shuts down innovation. If we're not discussing ideas, if we're not discussing different ideas or different perspectives and seeing how they fit together or they rub together or which one's better or how do we make them better together, we don't have that innovation point. So we have a lot of leaders who are really uncomfortable with the entire concept of conflict and then try to quash it straight across the board. So those are the two big ones that come to mind.
And that's interesting because I feel like a lot of people would probably tend to, if they're not themselves the hot reactor, they would probably just try to squash it, right? Is that what you find is one of the more common ways to address conflict or deal with conflict?
These are the two polars, right? So if we're looking at polarized thinking, there's the avoider. Yeah. I don't want to deal with it, so make it go away. And then there's the hot reactor. But we have, of course, that entire sort of shading of gray that goes between the two of them. We also are dealing with human beings here. So what might be a hot reaction point for me one day and lead me to blow my mind, another topic on another day when I'm in a different frame of mind or something else is happening in the organization or something else is happening in my personal life, I might then become an avoider. So we do have to understand that labeling people is a form of judgment and can cause unhealthy conflict. So if I'm labeled hot reactor and you avoid me and you treat me as a hot reactor, this leads to more conflict. And you can see the snowball effect starting here.
Yeah, people are so complex. That's why I don't like them. No, I'm just kidding. Um, but that makes sense. It makes complete sense. Um, so then, kind of looking at this from a healthy way or a healthy perspective, what can we start to do? Conflict is present. We know that in our organization, whether we're handling it in a healthy or unhealthy way is totally different story. So where do we first start by assessing the level of conflict, how we're handling it, how our employees are handling it? What do you do to help people start this conversation?
Starting a conversation on conflict, I like to start with giving the team or the group or the organization a common language. So this comes into some sort of conflict training. Now, I don't want to say this is the end all and be all because I've seen so many companies say, yeah, we're going to give you an hour-long conflict training and then everything will be happy and everything will be good. And that is not the case. What conflict training does is it gives you that common speak. So when I say we're in a conflict, you now know we're just having a difference of opinion. It's no longer, I hate you, Brandon. You're the most horrible person I've ever met, and I never want to work with you again. That's not the conflict we're in.
I am going to clip that out of this episode. So thank you.
Reverse mantra. So, it becomes a little less personal when these conflicts do arise in an organization. It becomes that change of perspective, and then we have a common language to move forward and start dealing with it. So, what is the situation? What are we talking about? What am I bringing in from my past into the current moment that could be affecting how I'm perceiving responses in the situation? So, that's kind of where I like to start. When I'm dealing with a whole organization. With individuals, it's a little bit different. I do like to do conflict coaching, which is more of a one-on-one approach, which really takes a look at how you as an individual looks at conflict and how you show up in conflict and honing and refining skills to manage conflict. So this is really great for up and coming leaders. This is really good for leaders who've been doing it a while and might need to brush up and polish up some skills a little bit in that arena.
Yeah, and what it sounds like too is or at least what I would imagine would happen is by just changing the language, how we're talking about this, probably helps significantly because we're immediately, when something comes up, we're now having to get present to the situation and think about what we're hearing, doing, saying in a different context. So immediately you have a pattern interrupt of where you are instead of just going right to your default responding method. You're taking a step back, you're taking a pause. How much does that pause even just help in the handling of conflict?
Absolutely huge. Actually, using the pause button is one of the things I use when I'm training and when I'm coaching. Is like, whoop, just hit the pause button. It's okay. You don't have to react right now. You can just take a moment and back off. So hitting pause, picking the right time and place to have that conflict after you're able to unpack the situation and measure your emotions and all of that can sometimes be a huge game changer. And once you've hit that pause button, you really need to look at how you're going to engage after that. So, what are the new skills you're going to apply? What are the skills that have been serving you well and are good and healthy skills that you're going to use in this situation? How do you build psychological safety with your colleagues, with your employees, with your supervisor, so that this conflict can lead to creativity and innovation?
Yeah, and that too is, it sounds like very important from just saying, I'm responsible for my own actions, interpretations, and thoughts, which you have the power to change a relationship. One person has the power to change it. I think the dangerous part is then relying on someone else seeing your point of view. That's probably where a lot of this comes from too, is if you bring something up to a coworker or a supervisor, an employee, and you're just worried about how they're going to react, well, you can't control them. So when you start to bring these new strategies in for dealing with conflict, for how you show up in conflict, what are some of the things that you have people do or you have them be present to in order to manage that situation so it doesn't blow up?
The first one that comes to mind is instead of reacting, instead of relying on the old habits, respond with curiosity. Respond with the question, oh my gosh, Brandon said something to me that I don't agree with. I'm going to go, what do you mean by that? How does that apply in this situation? How does that work if we bring in accounting? How does this work for our production team? How does this look at if we look at it 3 months or 3 weeks down the road? Can you explain it more to me? So instead of saying, no, that's a stupid idea, don't ever do that, I'm responding with that curiosity and deepening my understanding so we can start leveling off. It gives you affinity for me. It gives me the information I need so we can move forward together, because conflict is relational. And as much as people don't want to hear it, you do have relationships with everybody you work with. You spend most of your waking hours with people you work with, not with your family, not with your children. These relationships, while not necessarily deep ones, they are impactful just because of the duration of time you spent with them.
Yeah, and it's that human component that we can't get around, and we shouldn't want to get around too. It's building a collaborative environment is much more healthy than really a destructive environment or anything else. It's just getting each person to understand that and get them there on their own. So how do you go through that process with your clients and with large organizations where there are more people? Because what I would imagine is there's probably a few people in the crowd that are inevitably the my way is right, I don't care what anybody says. So how do you really get them up to speed? Because I would assume once you get them on board, everybody's on board.
Yeah, so we always have sort of there's sticks. Once everybody's sort of in, there's always that one stick sort of above the rest that kind of points in a different direction. So this is where a couple of things really need to come into play. Number one, this is where we may come from team coaching or training into more of a personal coaching environment. So more of a one-on-one. What is your internal dialogue about this? Why do you have to win, for example? Really unpack that. We also have to look at it from a leadership and a human resources perspective. What are the leaders doing to ensure that this individual does what's in the best interest of the organization and not what's in the best interest of the individual? And this can be a really challenging conversation, particularly if the stick in the mud is the rock star, that sales guy who always goes above and beyond their numbers, that operations guy who always, produces more widgets than everybody else. It's really hard when that individual is the rock star. But the rock star who might be in an unhealthy conflict relationship with anybody and everybody is really going to undermine the psychological safety of your rock solids. Your rock solids are the people who show up every day, do the job every day, get the job done every day. And if you lose these people, which is where you usually have your attrition when there's a high conflict environment, these people who don't want to be in that environment, oh yeah, the rock star got another award for doing all these extra sales, but makes everybody else's life miserable. As a leader, you've really got to weigh the pros and cons of that. Is hitting the sales numbers as important as replacing the accounting team every 6 months? You really got to look at that. And from a human resource perspective, it comes into what is the acceptable organizational behavior and what is not, and how do you guide that from a development perspective, and how do you guide that from a discipline perspective? So we have multifacets going on here when you're looking at those outliers.
Yeah, and there's so much involved with that too. Those are obviously tough questions to answer, but you talked to me about this before we started recording, the cost of conflict. Share that stat with me because it blew my mind. But also let's start to unpack all of the other things, like you said, the replacing employees, like what really is involved in the cost of unhealthy conflict.
So according to the 2009 numbers I have, conflict in the workplace in the United States alone costs over $350 billion. That's right. That was a B. $350 billion to organizations. So what builds in here? This is employee attrition. It is more cost effective to maintain an employee on the payroll than to go out and find another one, train another one, and hope the job gets done. So we look at the attrition rates. We're also looking at time invested from your leadership and time invested from your human resource departments to manage this kind of thing. We're looking at time off. leave of absences, sick days, work production issues, that kind of thing, associated with mental health challenges that come along with a highly conflicting situation. So I can't stand to go to work today because I can't look at that person again. So I'm just going to call in sick. Those Sunday night tummy aches, those Sunday night work blues as you're looking towards the week going, oh my goodness. So that comes into play there as well. And this also includes lawsuits. So if you're in a unionized environment, this is your grievances on level 1, level 2, arbitrations. This is going straight into the court systems as well. So you've really got to pay attention. Is your rock star and keeping that rock star with an unhealthy conflict matrix really saving your company money or making your company money when all these other things could potentially be happening?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious, the 2009, did they stop measuring because it just got too expensive to measure? What? Why haven't we measured this in 15 years?
I'm sure there are. My numbers are out of date, and COVID did throw, of course, a bit of a monkey wrench into that as well. So we have 2-3 years where the numbers are just kind of because of global things.
That's fair. And what I'll say is, I assume those numbers are much higher. That number was quoted in the United States because we're just a narcissistic country. So maybe go to other countries and this wouldn't be as bad in the workplace. But I don't know. I'm not the expert on that, Kat. You are.
Numbers in the UK, because they have less individuals, are a little bit lower. They're in pounds sterling. This was a 2014, don't quote me, a 2014 ARCUS study, but they're showing 9 billion pounds sterling every year on conflict, and for the same reasons. So when we look on per capita, so we look on head count, it's pretty equivalent.
That's so sad. I was hoping you were going to agree with me there. But anyway,
Sorry.
if we need to figure this out, right? We need to have better, healthier ways to deal with conflict and make it a leverage point for our companies. I think that's the real goal. But outside of your companies, like as an individual, if you can address conflict in a more healthy way, your life will be better. So why would you not want to find a better way to manage this and not just butt heads with people? Let's build each other up and collaborate rather than tear each other down and have true conflict. But you wrote a book on this, and you can help us take that first step. So tell me a little bit about your book.
So the book Smart Conflict, Turning Disputes into Growth Opportunities, came out in March. So this book is all about how to look inwards, and it's based upon the SMART conflict model, which is my workshop. So SMART is actually an acronym, and it looks at how we deal with things situationally, how we measure our emotions, how we build an agenda so that we have an appropriate outcome, or we're actually looking to the outcome, that we're looking at our relationships and we're picking the right time and place. So it goes through stories where I've handled conflict well and where I might not have handled conflict well. And I have changed the names of the guilty to protect privacy and not get sued.
So, talk about more conflict, right?
Talk about more conflict. Working with some of my clients, there are some really good stories in there so that folks don't have to learn things the hard way. Hopefully they can learn from the good things and the bad things that I've done throughout my career. And then take some time to self-reflect, because there are some questions that are really deep to ask. So what are you doing? How are you showing up in these conflict situations? So it's quite comprehensive.
That's awesome. I would definitely recommend going to check that out. It's smartconflictbook.com. If you're watching, it's on the screen. Wherever you are, though, it's down in the show notes and description down below. You can go grab a copy of the book. But Kat, you said there's questions in the book, which leads me to my final question, which we believe at What If, powerful questions get you powerful answers. So I love that you've incorporated that throughout your book to really get people thinking of how they can show up and manage conflict better in their own lives. But for this episode, around what we talked about here, what would you want to leave the listener with in terms of anything, how they're handling conflict, how they show up, how they manage it? What is that one question you want someone to go take the rest of the day and just think about and see if they can get that powerful answer in their life?
The question I would have people think about, either for past conflicts or the conflicts that are coming up, because they're always coming. How can you approach this conflict with curiosity? What curious questions can you ask to change the trajectory of that conflict?
Okay, it's my new mission to have this episode have 350 million downloads, because that one question could change the course of this country in its present moment. I hope everybody sees that, hears that question, and takes that into their daily lives. Because Kat, you're right. I mean, that one question is so powerful. I love it. Thank you for being an amazing guest on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
For those of you listening, watching, first and foremost, think about that question, please. That's an important one. Don't move on until you've thought about it. And also make sure you subscribe. We love bringing this daily madness of this show to you every single day of the week so we can get you further ahead on the path to growing your business one step at a time in, of course, a harmonious fashion. So I'll see you on tomorrow's episode of Harmonious at Lunch. Thanks for listening.